You may proceed.
And our security relies on American strength of purpose. And that's why our budget request seeks to invest in American security and in America's defense industrial base. The same is true for the recently passed National Security Supplemental that will support our partners in Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and make key investments to increase submarine production. In fact, about $50 billion of this supplemental will flow through our defense industrial base, creating good jobs in more than 30 states. So we're grateful for our partners in Congress who help us make the investments needed to strengthen America's security through both the supplemental and the president's budget request. The United States military is the most lethal fighting force on earth. And with your help, we're going to keep it that way. I deeply appreciate your support for our mission and our troops, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Secretary Austin, thank you for your testimony. Next, we'll have General Brown. General Brown, you have the floor.
Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Collins, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to join Secretary Austin and the Honorable Mike McCord to appear before you today. On behalf of the Joint Force, Department of Defense civilians, and our families, I want to thank Congress for your steadfast support and the opportunity to testify on the fiscal year 2025 defense budget request, which reflects our shared commitment to national security. I also want to thank you for passing the National Security Supplemental, which provides vital support to our allies, partners, and our defense industrial base to counter aggression and strengthen our joint force capabilities and capacity in preparation for any future contingency. The global security environment is increasingly complex. The 2022 National Defense Strategy identifies 5 key challenges. The People's Republic of China, our pacing challenge, continue its risky behavior around the globe. A newly aggressive Russia with its unprovoked war against Ukraine. A reckless Iran, who we saw a few weeks ago, attempts to escalate regional conflict with unprecedented attacks in support of proxy forces. A destabilizing North Korea, which threatens regional security, and violent extremist organizations which leverage instability to advance their cause. These challenges are interconnected, which demands a strategic approach, addressing the immediate threats while also preparing for future contingencies. It requires all of us to operate with a sense of urgency. Days after becoming the chairman, I laid out 3 expectations in my message to the Joint Force. Honing our warfighting skills has primacy in all we do. Modernizing and aggressively leading with new approaches, new concepts and approaches, and trust is the foundation of our profession. Our military exists to fight and win our nation's wars. We train every day to ensure we are so good at what we do that we deter any adversary for engaging U.S. in conflict. This budget requests $147 billion to sustain readiness and ensure the department can counter near-term threats. We're also focused on better integrating our allies and partners in our planning and operations by investing in critical programs and capability, expanding security cooperation, exercises, training, and interoperability. Our investments in readiness ensure the Joint Force can respond when the nation calls. While we are focused on our readiness for today, it is critical to modernize and lead with new concepts to prepare for tomorrow. The department continues to invest in capability and capacity to outpace our competitors while transforming from costly legacy platforms that are no longer relevant to the threat. This budget strategically invests $167.5 billion in procurement, underscoring our commitment to equip the Joint Force with unparalleled combat capabilities across every domain. This budget also invests $143.2 billion in research, development, tests, and evaluation of future capabilities that will retain our strategic edge. Finally, this budget invests significantly into nuclear modernization, digital innovation, multi-year procurement of critical munitions, and the strengthened defense industrial base. With rapidly evolving threats and technologies, accelerating our modernization is crucial. Lastly, trust is the foundation of our profession. Joint Force must build upon and uphold the trust in each other, trust of our families, trust of our elected leaders, and trust of our nation. Enhancing the quality of service and the quality of life of our personnel is not just a moral obligation, it's a strategic imperative. The budget includes investments in quality of service efforts such as advanced training, educational benefits, and career development, while also investing in quality of life projects like housing, medical clinics, and childcare facilities, as well as funding spouse employment initiatives, enhanced mental health resources, and robust programs to combat sexual assault. We must create an environment where all can reach their full potential. Trust that our joint force stands ready to defend our national interests, ready to deter aggression, and ready, if necessary, to fight and win our nation's wars. I thank you for your support and collaboration and our shared commitment to face the security challenges of today and prepare for tomorrow. We're living in consequential times, and there's no time to waste. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your statement, General Brown, and there will be probably multiple rounds, but there'll be 5 minutes per member. This is for you, Secretary Austin. The budget request is consistent with the cap set forth in the Federal Fiscal Responsibility Act. However, the proposed growth is below current inflation levels. It does not account for billions of dollars for additional requirements identified by the military services. As has been pointed out by both of you, this is a very dangerous time in which we live. In my lifetime, probably comparable to the early 60s with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, Mr. Secretary, where are you taking risks because of this budget gap? I should say, where are we taking risks because of this budget gap?
Thanks, Chairman. First of all, our budget continues to be strategy driven. Over the last several years, we've worked hard to make sure that we link the budget requests to the strategy, and that's been, in my view, the best approach to constructing the budget. But to meet the caps approved by Congress, we had to make some tough but responsible choices. And we prioritized near-term readiness. As you heard me say earlier, Chairman, we decided not to invest in some modernization that would not deliver results before 2030, and we invested in our people and our families. The kinds of decisions that we had to make were tough decisions that we had to make were things like 5th and 6th generation aircraft. But having said that, our budget does include, as you heard me say earlier, $143.2 billion for RDT&E and $167.5 billion for procurement. And because we accepted some risk in modernization for the out years, we'll need to have a growth in the top line in the out years to ensure that we can recapture some of the things that we weren't able to get into this budget.
So let me follow up on that. You talked about you're going to focus on the projects that can give you results before 2030. So that means basically with this budget, what we're doing is we're putting off expenditures into future budget cycles because these projects after 2030 are projects that will have to be taken care of fiscally, correct?
That's correct, Chairman. And our plan is to, going forward, invest in those things, but we weren't able to do it in this budget. We've prioritized near-term readiness and taking care of our people, and I believe that's the right approach.
Do you believe that in future budgets, if we're able to invest in those projects, that we will be able to catch up and remain on schedule?
I do, Chairman, provided if we are provided the resources and the growth in the top line in the out years that we'll ask for.
Okay. General Brown, you talked about where we are today. Is there operational impacts from this budget today, over the next year? And what impact does this have, say, 5 years down the road?
Or for operational impacts for today, because of our focus on readiness, I don't see operational impacts. Now, as the Secretary highlighted, as we had to defer some of our modernization, you think about 5, 6, years, a decade from now, there's potential challenges if we don't get the additional support in top line in the out years.
Excuse me, what kind of challenges are we talking about when you say additional challenges?
Well, part of it was the deferring some of our modernization and ensure, the thing I focus on as a chairman is ensure we have both capability and capacity. And we got to make sure we have capability that stays ahead of the threat, and then also have capacity to be able to operate in many of the areas around the world like we do today. And that's where we need to make sure we're working closely together on the out years to ensure that we can actually continue to modernize and make sure we stay ahead of the threat.
Okay, Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let me follow up on the chairman's question by asking you a very basic question, and that is, if you had your preference, would you be operating under a 1% increase? In other words, do you think that Congress should revisit the 1% cap that is imposed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act?
Certainly, the cap makes it more challenging and forces us to make choices that if we didn't have that cap, we obviously wouldn't have to make. So, yes, it does provide more challenges, but certainly we have worked hard to link our requests to our strategy, and as much of our strategy as we can support, we're going to support.
Thank you. I want to switch to a different issue. On October 25th, 2023, that was the darkest day in Maine history in my lifetime. 18 Mainers lost their lives, 13 others were injured in the worst mass shooting that we have seen. The killer, Robert Card, was a sergeant first class in the U.S. Army Reserve. The governor of Maine established an independent commission that has issued an interim report. And that report included several very troubling findings about missed opportunities to prevent this tragedy. For instance, mental health providers recommended to Mr. Card's Army Reserve unit that, quote, measures be taken to safely remove all firearms and weapons from his home. Well, the Army Reserve unit took appropriate action to reserve Mr. Card's access to military weapons. This recommendation was never communicated by the Army to relevant law enforcement agencies in Maine. We had members of Mr. Card's unit raising alarms with their supervisors about their fear that he was extremely dangerous. He actually assaulted a fellow soldier. He was institutionalized for 2 weeks at a hospital for those with mental illness in New York State while he was on drill. We have an Inspector General's report that is underway to look at this more thoroughly. After I receive that report, I intend to draft legislation that would require our military services to report to the appropriate authorities when a service member poses a threat to him or herself or to others while protecting the Second Amendment rights of our service members. Would you commit to working with me on such legislation to establish formal policies and procedures so that we can ensure that our military services share this kind of relevant information with law enforcement and with state officials under the appropriate state laws?
Thanks, Senator. Well, first of all, this was a tragedy, and my thoughts and prayers go out to all those affected by this tragedy. the health and welfare of our troops is very important to me, at the top of my mind all the time. So is the health and welfare of our community members. And so absolutely, we will work with you to ensure that we have the mechanisms to, where appropriate, pass relevant information to authorities. And so I look forward to my staff engaging your staff on this issue and going forward.
Thank you very much.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary, General Brown, and Mr. McCord. Secretary Austin, while I'm glad that we were able to pass the National Security Supplemental, I think all of us were relieved that that happened. What we've seen is that Russia's industrial base has been able to increase production, in part due to sanctions evasions, in part because they're getting assistance now from the People's Republic of China, from Iran, from North Korea. And we know that Iran now supplies 70% of Russia's drone capabilities in Ukraine. Those are the same drones that they're using in the Middle East to kill American service members and attack us. So can you talk a little bit about how the administration is seeking to limit industrial-based cooperation between Russia and China, and what in this budget will help us do that?
Well, we certainly have raised this issue in the right channels, Senator, and you are right. Prior to, at one point, Russia had experienced significant losses because of the work that Ukraine and its forces was doing. They had inflicted significant casualties on the Russian forces, destroyed a significant amount of its equipment. And so, to your point, we saw Russia engage North Korea, who provided quite a bit of munitions and missiles. The drones provided by Iran really kind of helped begin to turn the tide there for Russia a bit and allow them to kind of get back up on their feet. In addition to them increasing their production in their industrial base. But without the help from Iran, North Korea, and China, to your point, this probably would not have occurred to the degree that it has occurred. So we have engaged in the right channels to emphasize our serious concerns about PRC and others providing this sort of support. As you know, there are sanctions that we continue to look at in a number of areas, and we revisit those sanctions to ensure that we're being as effective as we can. But that continues to be a work in progress, and so this is a whole of government effort, and again, I think we're engaging in the right channels, but there's a lot more work that continues to need to be done.
Well, thank you. Clearly, we still have work to do. Secretary Austin, the last time I saw you before the Armed Services Committee, we talked about the 60 Minutes report about anomalous health incidents, and you committed to taking a look again at the genesis of those incidents. But one of the other aspects of that are the personnel affected by those anomalous health incidents. And in DOD, the fiscal year appropriations bill for DOD in 2024 provided funding specific for payments to victims of anomalous health incidents. And there is funding in 2025 to provide payments as well. But the rulemaking that is required to get those payments out the door has not yet happened. Will you commit to this committee that the department will work on that and provide the required payments to victims?
Absolutely, Senator.
And do you know when DOD plans to publish its final regulations around this issue?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have a forecast.
If you could get back to the committee, I would appreciate that. I know that we have a number of people who are waiting for help who have been affected. General Brown, this budget invests in important conventional capabilities, but one of the areas where we still have challenges is in the area of disinformation and misinformation. So can you talk about how the budget invests in our capabilities for cyber and in the information domain to counter what we're seeing from virtually all of our adversaries?
Well, there's areas that we're investing in the information domain. In particular, there's about $14.5 billion in our cyber capabilities for both offensive and defensive cyber. There's about $1.8 billion for artificial intelligence to better understand how we would use that. But I think it's also important that we understand how our adversaries would use artificial intelligence against us. And it's really, again, how we bring together our data and using our data and having good ways to analyze, particularly the misinformation, and ensuring that we stay ahead in the, particularly the cyber realm, to get information out and get the facts out early. And part of this is not only the investment in the technology, but it's also the investment in the training of our force to move at the pace of the way information moves today. That's something we'll continue to work on as well.
Well, thank you. My time is up, but I hope we're also working with the Global Engagement Center at the Department of State, because clearly this is an area where we have an equal amount of work to do. Thank you.
Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your presence and service. The administration has halted a shipment of American-made munitions to Israel. Even if it's the administration's goal to reach a ceasefire agreement, does this not send the wrong message to our ally Israel and embolden Iran and Iranian-backed groups? We should not be signaling to Iran's enemies that our support is conditional. Many of us in this room worked hard to get aid included and passed by the House and Senate in the emergency supplemental. My questions on this topic are three. Should we be concerned that the aid that was included in that recent supplemental is in jeopardy of being withheld from Israel? Did the Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken, consult with you on this decision? And do you agree that halting U.S. assistance to Israel emboldens its enemies?
Thanks, Senator. First of all, our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. As you have seen from the very beginning, we have flowed billions of dollars of security assistance at a very rapid pace into Israel. And as you just mentioned, with your help, and we're grateful for this, you just passed the largest ever supplemental appropriation. And most recently, on April 13th and 14th, you saw us lead an unprecedented coalition to defend Israel as Iran attacked Israel with a significant number of drones and ballistic missiles. And so we're going to continue to do what's necessary to ensure that Israel has the means to defend itself. But that said, we are currently reviewing some near-term security assistance shipments in the context of unfolding events in Rafah.
So you agree with the pause, and you were consulted and agree with the pause, Mr. Secretary?
I think we haven't made any decisions. We did pause as we reevaluated some of the security assistance that we're providing to.
To stop the clock so that Jerry gets his full 2.5 minutes.
So we've been very clear, Senator, as you know, from the very beginning that Israel shouldn't launch a major attack in Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space. And again, as we have assessed the situation, we paused one shipment of high payload munitions. And again, I think we've also been very clear about the steps that we'd like to see Israel take to account for and take care of those civilians before major combat takes place. We certainly would like to see no major combat take place in Rafah, but certainly our focus is on making sure that we protect the civilians. And we've not made a final determination on how to proceed with that shipment. And I would highlight that this shipment doesn't have anything to do with the supplemental appropriations that you just helped us get. And my final comment is that we are absolutely committed to continuing to support Israel in its right to defend itself.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. I worry about the suggestion that support by the United States is conditional. Let me turn to a different topic. Legislative Proposal 480, the Space Guard issue about the National Guard. The code dictates that National Guard equities cannot be withdrawn without the consent of a state's governor. I am informed that recently governors from 53 states and territories wrote you a letter opposing this legislative proposal. Would you tell me what the department's thoughts are? Do you consult with the governors? And based upon this overwhelming feedback, does it cause any reconsideration about the legislative proposal?
I have received a letter from the governor, Senator, and most recently, Secretary of the Air Force has reached out and engaged the governors to talk about this issue and explain the rationale. As you know, when we stood up Space Force, we took on units and people that were focused on the space mission and incorporated those from the Air Force, from the Army, from the Navy, and incorporated those people and units into Space Force. This measure will affect, I believe, a small number of people, but certainly, I understand the governor's concerns, and we owe it to the governors to engage them on it, and that's why Secretary of the Air Force has recently engaged them personally on this issue.
I encourage that to occur. Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee, Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair Tester, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Right now, we face a number of serious challenges across the globe. That's why Vice Chair Collins and I pushed through the gridlock to hammer out and pass a strong national security package that sent support to our allies, especially Ukraine, humanitarian aid to civilians, and a message to our allies and adversaries alike that America is still strong enough and united enough to lead the free world. We didn't just pass a bill, we passed a critical test on the world stage. And something I don't want anyone to forget, the bill the House eventually passed was essentially identical to the one the Senate passed 2 months earlier. However, the delay in inaction was not without cost. We and our allies lost precious time and resources during those 2 months that we can't recover. This is similar to the costs we face each time we flirt with a government shutdown or put the government on autopilot under continuing resolutions. Those situations come with costs, and notably, neither China nor Russia face the threat of a government shutdown or a CR. I'm certain all of us agree that democracies are stronger than dictatorships, but we have got to prove it, and that will take bipartisanship. Because as we all know, our work is not done. We must maintain America's leadership and make smart investments to help reduce global conflict and instability, which of course keeps our country safe. That means ensuring our military remains the best in the world, supporting the men and women in uniform who sacrifice greatly to keep our country safe, having our allies' backs, and taking an all-of-a-government approach to keep our country strong and secure. We are working with tight fiscal constraints, but Secretary Austin, it is so important we make sure not only that your department has the resources needed to execute our national defense strategy, but that your counterparts across government also have the resources they need to keep our country safe. The 1% increase in funding provided for FY25 under the caps is as inadequate for non-defense spending as it is for the Department of Defense. Having just worked together to write and pass 12 bipartisan bills for FY24, we all know this very clearly. So as members talk about how we might increase investments to better meet our defense needs, we cannot ignore our needs here at home as well. When it comes to additional resources above the caps, which the Vice Chair and others have mentioned, I'm going to insist on parity for non-defense spending to make sure we are providing for our children and families, keeping them safe. After all, our safety also depends on our diplomatic corps, which works around the clock to prevent and end conflict. Our counterterrorism efforts and the law enforcement personnel working to identify and disrupt threats, our public health system and pandemic response efforts, the officials enforcing our sanctions to help choke off financial resources for dictators like Putin, our work countering the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, ensuring we remain on the cutting edge of research and manufacturing, and so much more. So with that in mind, Secretary Austin, can you talk about your work with your counterparts across government, whether that's at state or commerce or so many other agencies, and how their efforts assist the work you do to keep our country safe and factor into our national defense strategy?
You've heard a number of secretaries say before, Chair Murray, that if we don't fund state and others to the right level, then we're going to need more bullets, because they do great and important work to move things towards greater stability and security in all regions of the world. And so it's this whole of government effort, this interaction between departments in support of our overall goals and objectives that really is what causes us to be effective. So it's important that they do get supported.
Thank you. And as the chair of our committee knows, that includes our veterans and the challenges that they're having right now with the VA budget. Mr. Secretary, on the $60 billion that Congress appropriated to support Ukraine in its fight against Putin, a package this committee worked on for months, as this war continues now into its third year, how is this funding being used? What improvements are we seeing on the front line?
Well, it's still very early on. As you know, it does take time to get some of this capability in, but we, in anticipation of the potential of getting the supplemental approved, we forward position some things, some critical things like air defense interceptors and artillery munitions, so that if it were approved, we would be able to rapidly move those things in support of Ukraine, and we are doing that. You know, I talk to my counterpart in Ukraine every week. I just talked to him yesterday, as a matter of fact, and checking on how that's going, what his most critical needs are, I think, again, this is going to be very, very helpful. But to your point, it's hard to buy back time, but given that, I think that without this help, Ukraine would have a very tough time defending against what is a superior force with the Russians.
And is our inventory here at home being replenished?
It will this supplemental will certainly help in a major way in that regard. I want to make sure that we do have the ability to replenish our stocks, and as we have drawn down some of our stocks and provided weapons and vehicles to Ukraine, we'll replace those weapons with newer models, and all of that work flows through our industrial base, and it'll affect some 30 different states in the country, and that creates good jobs, good paying jobs for Americans, and we remain excited about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Vice Chair Collins for this important hearing. Secretary Austin and General Brown, thank you both for your service. I appreciate your leadership and unwavering commitment to our service members, and very importantly to their families. Secretary Austin, the National Defense Strategy underscores the need to prioritize interoperability and enable coalitions with enhanced capabilities. I remain dedicated to working with the Air Force to ensure ebbing air National Guard base in Fort Smith, Arkansas becomes the premier F-35 pilot training center in the future, it is important that this mission begins on time and with the necessary resources. Secretary Austin, can you speak to how this mission will strengthen warfighting capabilities and create an enduring advantage with our allies and partners?
Well, this clearly provides the capability for us to enhance our interoperability, Senator, and it's a great platform, great capability. The training is always first rate because of the commitment of our trainers. And again, there are a lot of countries who want this capability, and having the ability to train to standard in country is absolutely important. And so it contributes to the overall readiness of the combined force. So you can interoperability means having the right policies and procedures, but it also means the ability to work together with our comrades in other countries.
Right.
And so this face-to-face work that is conducted at places like this, I think, is critical. So.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Brown, you and I recently visited Camden, Arkansas, where we toured a munitions production facility and saw the urgent need for our defense industrial base to increase capacity and replenish our stockpiles. The passage of the $95 billion security supplemental bill proves that when we provide assistance to our allies and partners, we strengthen our defense industrial base as well. This fiscal year, Congress also approved multi-year procurement for 6 missile programs for the first time. General Brown, what impact will multi-year procurement authority have on the defense industrial base and specifically munitions production?
Well, when I think about multi-year procurement, what it does is it provides opportunity for consistency. And that consistency is for us to be able to provide a consistent demand signal to an industry so they can actually get a workforce, have a supply chain, and know what to forecast for over several years. I think that's going to help us in the long run because that consistency will help build trust. It'll drive down costs, and it will then ensure we get capability delivered on time. If we have inconsistency, it's going to decrease that trust, increase the cost, and then also increase how long it's going to take to get the capabilities in the hands of our warfighter. So the multi-year procurement, the national security supplemental that will invest in our defense industrial base is hugely important, not only for our allies and partners, but it's just as important for our force as well.
Good. And I appreciate you getting out and about. I know you're traveling a lot, visiting these places. And again, I think that's really important and very well received. Secretary Austin, I appreciate your continued focus in taking care of people. The budget calls for a 4.5% pay increase for service members and annual increases to housing and subsistence allowances. The quadrennial review of military compensation is due to be completed by January 2025. In the meantime, there have also been multiple recommendations to enhance pay flexibility for service members, including incentive pay for certain career fields and targeted raises for junior enlisted service members. Secretary Austin, in your opinion, where would pay flexibility be most effective if implemented?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the support that you've given us to date. As you pointed out, we're asking you for a 4.5% pay raise in this budget request, Senator. But to take you back a bit, in 23, we asked you for a 4.6% pay raise. You supported us on that. And in the fiscal year 24 budget, we asked you for a 5.2% pay raise. And that's the largest pay raise in 20 years. And so when you add those together, I think that's a pretty meaningful increase in compensation. My goal is to reduce the costs on troops and families and provide more resources. And so anything that we do in terms of these types of actions, to answer your question, does reduce the strain on our troops and families. Whether or not we can do that going forward, certainly any recommendation that's made, we'll have to do an analysis in terms of how it affects the budget now and into the future. And so as you propose different things, we certainly look to work with you and provide you that analysis. So.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Boozman. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. Secretary, thanks for being here. I want to talk to you about the Red Hill closure and remediation. Once the decision was taken to shut down Red Hill, that part went relatively smoothly and was ahead of schedule. And then there's the whole enterprise of the new concept of operations as it relates to fuel in the Pacific. I'm going to set that aside for the moment because the thing that the community is working on and thinking about the most is long-term health impacts and long-term environmental impacts, and what of the appropriated money that we provided to the department is allocated for that. Now, we just got a brief, and so we have some broad categories for what I think is called community response. But I'd love it if you could just articulate both at the conceptual level and in as granular a manner as you can, what you're planning to do with the remainder of the money as it relates to making sure that none of that petroleum eventually makes its way back into any of those aquifers, and that anyone who's been harmed by ingesting petroleum product gets taken care of by the department.
Well, thanks, Senator Schatz. As you mentioned, once the defueling was complete, then we stood down the Red Hill Task Force and then stood up a task force that the Navy is now in charge of and is charged with environmental remediation. And I've had personal conversations with both the leader of the task force and, most importantly, the Secretary of the Navy on how important this is, and they are committed to ensuring that they do the right things to make sure that we get this right going forward. We owe it to the members of the community to ensure that we do in fact do this. In terms of specific amounts of funds that are allocated to each segment of this, I'll have to take that for the record and come back to you on that, sir.
That's fine. And we just got briefed on it yesterday, and it's still a bit of big pots of money categories, 95 million here, 32 million there, 562 going to the task force. So we don't even know what these numbers mean. But I think, the community is asking me what's happening with the money. It has to be obligated by the end of this fiscal year. And so time is short. So if we can get fidelity on that, it doesn't have to be with you, but it can be any member of your team. That would be very, very
And while we're at it,
helpful.
Senator,
Yes.
with your permission, I'd just like to thank you and the delegation for your continued support. Without that, we probably wouldn't have the adequate resources to do the things that are going to need to be done going forward here.
Thank you. General Brown, the amount of aid that this committee can provide is finite. Given that the Indo-Pacific is the priority theater, I'm going to say this somewhat less diplomatically than my prepared question. What keeps you up at night? What are the unfunded priorities that you think we really need to take a hard look at in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, the things that I stay focused on, and I'll just tell you, I'm very confident in our joint force, so there's not much that keeps me up at night. But I do stay focused on ensuring we have the capability and capacity for our joint force to execute what the nation asks. And so it is the modernization things that we highlighted earlier in this hearing that we had to defer because of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And so I want to make sure that we actually have that capability and capacity as we modernize. It's also the multi-year procurement that we also spoke about on munitions. I also want to have a strong defense industrial base so we can produce those munitions and those capabilities So we don't have a fair fight. I want to have an unfair fight where we have the advantage and do that not only with our joint force, but also with our allies and partners.
This is a little bit outside of our committee, but a lot of us are on the MilCon committee as well. The other thing I'd flag is overseas MilCon is never the most exciting thing for a member of the United States Senate to fund, but it is really essential in the Indo-Pacific theater. And then certainly in the state of Hawaii, a lot of the DoD's assets, bases and installations and everything else are sitting on really, really old infrastructure. So that's the other thing that's less exciting to fund: sewer systems, water systems, electrical redundancy, and all the rest of it. But we're not capable if we don't have those things operating well. So let's at least elevate it, even though, it's not exactly the kind of thing that you do a ribbon cutting for if you're a good politician. So thank you.
Then all those things cost money. And it's another reason we need to revisit the caps. Thank you, Senator Schatz.
Thank you.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for your great service to our country. Secretary Austin, I'm a little concerned, very concerned about the credibility of the administration's deterrence policy. When I see President Biden's messaging to Putin and to Iran and to the Houthis and other Iran-backed groups, I just see President Biden saying, don't. And we've had, attacks. People are obviously not adhering to that. I'm concerned that we are significantly eroding our deterrence by setting these sort of ambiguous boundaries and letting our adversaries kind of walk over us sometimes. So what steps are you and the president taking to establish a stronger, more credible deterrence against these threats from our adversaries, besides just don't?
I take it you're speaking about the Middle East.
Yes, sir.
Specifically. So, we had a number of goals at the very beginning of this crisis, and one of them was to protect our people and both our troops and civilians in the region. Another was to recover the hostages. Another was to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to support Israel in its efforts to defend itself. And then finally, it's our goal to ensure that we contain this conflict in Gaza and not have a regional conflict breakout. So you saw us early on deploy some pretty substantial capabilities into theater to discourage people from trying to do that, from trying to blow this into a regional conflict. And I think even though there's been dust-ups throughout the region, we don't see a regional conflict at this point, Senator. So if you take a look at the attacks that were being conducted against our troops, you recall that in January, leading up to January, we saw a number of attacks against our troops and our bases. And you saw us in February conduct a pretty major strike that the president authorized in both Iraq and Syria. Since that time, we've seen 2 incidents, and we attribute those actions to probably rogue elements. So in that case, they have been deterred from attacking our troops. But in terms of Iran and its actions in the region, Iran continues to present a threat to the region, and that's something that we're going to have to remain focused on for sure.
Let me ask both of you a question here about the reports that of withholding weapons. We all voted, many of us, I certainly did, and was pleased to support the bill by 79 to 18 to reinvigorate not just our own defense industrial, but also to give aid to several other entities. What is the status of withholding our weaponry that we voted to send to Israel? Are we doing that? Or why are we doing that?
Again, our commitment to Israel is ironclad, Senator. And as I said earlier, since October 7th, we have flowed in billions of dollars worth of security assistance. And as you just mentioned, you just passed the largest supplemental in history that's focused on Israel. And we're going to continue to do what's necessary to support Israel. Um,
Are
We are
those reports
currently-
false then that I'm reading?
No, we are currently reviewing some near-term security assistance shipments in the context of the unfolding events in Rafah.
So, so we are withholding our shipments of weapons predicated on the strategy that Israel's employing and going into Rafah. Is that the bottom line here?
We've not, again, we're assessing. We have not made any final decisions on this yet, but to answer your question, yes,
Yes.
there are some things that we're taking a closer look at.
Okay, that's an answer that's, well, thank you for clarifying it. I wouldn't say I agree with it, but thank you for clarifying it. General Brown, let me ask you, this is one of the things that's come up on the refortification of our own munitions. How do you see that now that we've passed this and the president signed this?
Well, it's going to put us on a much better path. And it's not only what the supplemental, but it also say the FY24 National Defense Authorization Act, which allowed for multi-year procurement for 6 systems. I wouldn't look to actually expand that in the future on multi-year procurement, because what that will do will provide levels of consistency for our defense industrial base, so they can actually workforce, facilities, supply chains, and allow us to make sure we have a capacity from a munitions standpoint.
So you're convinced that we're on a glide path to renew our munitions supplies to a satisfactory level for you all?
We're on a good path. And
Good.
one of the pieces I'd also add, though, getting a budget on time is actually really important to actually provide that level of consistency, so we can write contracts and gives our defense industrial base the confidence and the trust that they can invest and have that workforce and supply chain.
I think we all hear you. Thank you.
Got it.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Tester, Vice Chair Collins, and thank you to the leadership of this committee, the full committee chair and vice chair, for navigating some very challenging dynamics and getting ultimately delivered to our warfighters and to all the different departments and agencies that were supported through the supplemental, a critically needed additional funding. As a new member of this subcommittee, I look forward to working with you. I've got 2 questions I'd like to focus on. As you heard Chair Murray in her, I thought, compelling commentary, we need to coordinate between defense, diplomacy, and development to be as effective as possible, particularly in places that are on the margins of the main conflicts currently appropriately occupying most of your time. I chair the subcommittee that funds the State Department and USAID. 5 years ago, President Trump signed into law the Global Fragility Act, which Senator Graham and I and 24 other senators co-sponsored and worked on. And it's a simple proposition. It requires coordination between DoD, USAID, and state in fragile countries that are not yet failed states, not yet scenes of active combat, but where we might implement the same sort of strategy we pursued in Colombia over a long period of time to prevent a fragile state from becoming a failed state. One of my concerns has been the genuine lack of DoD engagement in Global Fragility Act implementation. I understand you have a lot on your plate, but there are several identified nations and areas of focus under GFA. One of them happens to now be the subject of, I think, renewed intense engagement, coastal West Africa. I've been to every country in the Sahel. I have visited the relevant air base in Niger that is now being occupied by both Russian and American troops, as we are likely being forced prepared for quite some time, have been asking now for years for additional security assistance.